It begins not with the clash of swords, nor the roar of war drums, but with silence soft, ancient, endless. The desert whispers secrets long buried beneath the dunes. The wind moves carefully here, as though it too remembers, and in that hush, a forgotten empire waits to be remembered. Close your eyes. Picture a city carved from red stone, its towers shaped like blooming flowers, its walls kissed by the sun. Not a myth, not a fable, but real. So real that merchants once stood in its markets with arms full of silk and jars of golden dates. Children once ran through its alleys, their laughter echoing between the pillars, and a queen once stood on a balcony, watching the horizon as though waiting for history itself to kneel before her. They called it Kate the sun's last daughter, but you will not find it in textbooks. No maps lead there. It faded before the printing press, before the age of ink and record. Kate lived, burned, ruled, and then disappeared, like a flame caught in wind. So how do we know it existed? We begin with dust. In the 1930s, an explorer named Ulrich Hale found something strange in the Syrian desert. Not bones, not treasure, just a stone, covered in writing older than Latin, older than Greek. He brought it home to Cambridge. Years passed. Then one night, under the flicker of an oil lamp, a linguist whispered aloud the name of a forgotten city, Cadith, and everything changed. They returned, with shovels, with maps, with questions, and beneath layers of silence, they found remnants, a gate, broken but still proud, a mosaic of a woman crowned in sun rays, and deeper still, carvings that told a story no one had heard in 2,000 years. Cadith was not just a city. It was the heart of a vast desert empire, an empire with no enemies, no conquerors, and no heirs. Its people called themselves Sarati, the Sand Keepers. They didn't build armies, they built stars. Their towers were observatories, their markets traded in stories and time. They knew when the moon would disappear a century ahead. They whispered to stars as though they were family, and once every 20 years, they held a ceremony called the Night of Returning Skies, where every citizen gathered to recite the names of stars long dead. It was not power that defined Cadith, it was memory, but something changed. No one knows when. No fire, no war, no famine, just a vanishing. One day, the city hummed with light, the next, it was wind and sand. The Sarati, as though answering a call only they could hear, left, or faded, or both. Some say they saw a sign in the sky, a star pulsing red, then vanishing. Others believe they unlocked something too old to control, a knowledge that was never meant to be remembered, and when they understood, they stepped away from history on purpose. The desert does not speak in sentences. It speaks in echoes, and Cadith is the longest echo of all. Even now, scientists argue over its ruins. Was it a religious haven, a scientific capital, a myth? But every year, just before the hottest day, strange patterns emerge in the sand, circles, spirals, like fingerprints of a people too gentle for conquest and too wise to remain. And if you listen, really listen, you may hear them, not in words, but in the spaces between them. Close your eyes again. Let the wind carry you. There is a voice in the dunes, patient and kind, and it whispers, we remembered the stars, so they remembered us. Now sleep. History does not end. It only waits. Somewhere in the British Museum, in a quiet room away from the glass and crowds, lies a tablet the size of a man's hand. No labels, no gold, just stone and silence. It is said that if you stand close enough, you can feel a warmth radiating from it like the stone itself remembers sunlight. That tablet is the only known surviving message written in the Sarati script, and what little of it has been deciphered contains just one phrase, carved deeply into the stone, we returned what was borrowed. No one knows what that means. Scholars debate endlessly, returned what, to whom? Some believe it refers to their knowledge secrets too powerful to be trusted with the future. Others whisper of a celestial pact, a trade made not with empires or kings, but with time itself. And still, the desert keeps its silence. but traces remain. In Jordan, near Wadi Rum, there's a cave known only to the Bedouins. Inside, symbols shimmer faintly under torchlight, symbols that match those found in Kadesh, shapes that resemble constellations. In one carving, a group of figures reach upward, their hands touching a spiral of stars. A local guide once told a visitor, they were not looking up. They were going home. For years, people dismissed Kadesh as legend, a bedtime story. But in 2019, satellite imaging picked up something new: linear formations beneath the sand, stretching for miles. Too precise to be natural, too hidden to be modern. And at the center, a perfect hexagon. 6 walls, facing 6 forgotten directions. In ancient Sarati belief, they were not 4 cardinal points, but 6, the known world, and the hidden one. North, south, east, west. And 2 more above and within. These weren't just metaphors, they were roads. The Sarati believed that everything in the universe was connected through resonance like strings in a vast instrument. If you knew the right tone, the right vibration, you could move not just through space, but through understanding. They built their cities to sing. Wine passed through their halls in harmonics. Water dripped in rhythmic intervals. Even the way their floors were tiled had a purpose: to echo footsteps in sacred patterns. Imagine living inside a song, a city, not made of stone and mortar, but of memory and music. That is what Kadesh was, and perhaps that is why it disappeared, not by collapse, or war, or disaster, but by ascension, a quiet graduation, a culture that reached the edge of knowledge and chose to dissolve rather than dominate. Not extinction, not failure, a completion. Still, we search, not just archaeologists, but dreamers, artists, children who look at the stars and feel a tug in their chests they cannot explain. It is the call of forgotten empires, the echo of wisdom whispered in a language the earth still remembers. And sometimes, in the dry wine of a sleepless night, you may feel it too, that longing, that recognition, because history is not behind us. It circles, it waits, and if you are still enough, quiet enough, the past might sit beside you and ask, do you remember? Not everything must be loud to be true. Some stories sleep, some knowledge hides not to be forgotten, but to be kept safe until we are ready. So rest now. Let the stars wheel above you, as they once did over Kadesh. Let the desert cradle your thoughts, and as sleep takes you, carry this truth. Empires may fall, cities may vanish, but stories. Stories do not die. They wait for someone to listen. Long ago, before language became fixed, before the written word claimed permanence, there were listeners. Not rulers, not soldiers, listeners. That was the Sarati way, to listen to the world, to each other, to the stars. To listen, they believed, was to remember correctly, and so, they built their temples not as places of worship, but as chambers of silence, rooms carved from limestone, angled perfectly to catch sound, not light. The desert, they said, was never empty. It sang. Every grain of sand carried a memory. When the wind moved, it stirred the archives of the earth. In one recovered text, a Sarati elder speaks, we are not here to conquer the world, but to remember it. This one phrase has become a mantra for some modern philosophers. They argue that Kadesh was the world's first conscious civilization, a culture that knew history would forget them, and chose that forgetfulness as a form of purity. They did not carve monuments, shouting their names. They carved quiet, and yet somehow we still found them. In the early 2000s, a group of researchers conducting thermal imaging deep in the Arabian Peninsula stumbled upon what they thought were natural ridges, but as night fell and the temperature dropped, heat signatures remained in patterns. Square courtyards, underground vaults, and a spiral staircase, now buried under 2,000 years of silence. Beneath the sand, geometry. It matched the architecture of the lost Temple of Wines, a structure mentioned in only one Sarati text, a place built not to honor gods, but frequencies. The walls of this temple were said to vibrate with the tones of the earth. Visitors would step inside and be overwhelmed with a sound so low, it could only be felt in the bones. The Sarati didn't worship deities, they worshipped design, the structure of reality, the harmony of opposites. They believed sound was the first language of the universe, that before light, before matter, there was vibration. And to live well, one must live in tune, not morally, not spiritually, but physically, emotionally, mathematically. They weren't mystics, they were engineers of silence, and perhaps that's what terrified those who came after them, the conquerors of later ages, when they marched across deserts, found no resistance in Kadeth's domain, but they also found no people, no riches, no spoils, nothing to burn, nothing to claim, just shapes in the sand that defied their logic, staircases that led nowhere, walls that absorbed sound, doorways that faced no sun. The desert mocked them, because you cannot invade what does not resist, and so Kadeth became a ghost, a whisper passed down through caravan tales and dying fires, a place that some said could only be seen when you stopped looking for it, a city that required you to forget everything you knew. Only then would it appear. Even today, there are travelers, desert nomads, who claim to have seen the outline of Kadeth at dusk. They say the air shifts, the light bends, and for a moment, a city stands not in stone, but in suggestion. They say you can feel the hum in your chest, like a forgotten lullaby. But blink and it's gone. Some scientists chalk this up to mirages, temperature shifts, hallucinations caused by dehydration. Others aren't so sure, because the coordinates given by these wanderers, though scattered by time, begin to form a pattern, a perfect spiral. The Sarati spiral, symbol of cycles, return, and an ending thought. Coincidence? Perhaps, but history rarely leaves patterns. By accident. As you drift closer to sleep now, let yourself imagine this, that somewhere beneath the sand, there is still a city breathing slowly in the dark, that its walls still hold warmth from a sun it no longer sees, that its halls remember names that no mouth has spoken in centuries, and that Kadeth waits not to rise again, but to be remembered once, correctly, by someone gentle enough to listen. You may not find it in this life, but perhaps in dreams, or in that soft moment before waking, when the world is quiet, and the wind moves just right. Rest easy now. You are walking paths older than time. You are not alone. The wind speaks in cycles. It returns where it began. And as the centuries spun past, what Kadeth had built did not crumble. It faded with dignity. Not like ruins taken by storm, but like breath leaving the lungs of a sleeping god. It left no screams, no warnings, just traces, curves, tones, a whisper of something too perfect to need permanence. This, too, was by design. The Sarati believed that the truest things in life were not meant to last forever. They believed beauty was strongest when it disappeared, just before one could hold it. They called it Eslan, the sacred vanishing. They applied it to everything: art, architecture, even relationships. A painting was erased after viewing. A love was set free before it dulled. A city was built to vanish once its truth was understood. In this, they found peace. And in that peace, perhaps, they transcended. One Sarati scroll, half burned and half translated, tells of a final ceremony. It took place under a moonless sky. The entire population stood silent in the central square. No torches, no music, only stillness. And then, slowly, they turned their backs to the world and stepped forward into the unknown, one by one. As if following a rhythm no one else could hear. No one knows where they went, or if they ever did, but the scroll ends with just 3 words, etched with perfect symmetry. We knew when, not where, not why. When. And that's what makes them different. So many civilizations wait too long. Wait for war, for hunger, for death. But Kadeth did not fall. It concluded. And that makes all the difference. We, today, are surrounded by noise. Our cities scream with lights. Our histories are carved with pride. We archive everything, as if fearing the silence, as if believing that without proof, we were never real. But what if the opposite is true? What if it is in forgetting gentle, intentional forgetting that we become most human? This is what the Sarati tried to teach us, that silence is not emptiness, that disappearance is not death, that vanishing can be a gift. Maybe you don't need to understand it all. Maybe it's enough to know they existed, and to feel, just for a moment, what they left behind. Now, sleep. Let go of what cannot last. Let Kadith pass through you, like a song you once knew but never learned. Let the wind carry the echoes. Let the stars write what we cannot, because some empires weren't meant to rule. They were meant to remind us that in stillness there is memory, and in memory there is light. Not because they lacked gold, but because they believed that nothing burdens the mind more than being above another soul. The mirror kings of Altuvin ruled not from thrones, but from reflection halls, vast chambers lined with polished obsidian and moonstone. There were no guards, no servants, just stillness. And mirrors, thousands of them. Every decision made in Altuvin was done in front of one's own reflection. You did not speak until you had looked into your eyes for a full breath. You did not judge until you had studied your own silence. It was said that a man who cannot face himself has no right to face the world. Their kingdom was unlike any other. There were no borders, no armies. Their maps were drawn not by territory, but by influence, the kind that cannot be seen but can be felt. A warm village, far from the capital, might be drawn closer on the map than a rebellious city only miles away. To rule, for the Mirror Kings, was not to control. It was to reflect the truth of others until they could see it themselves. And that's where the danger began, because in a world built on lies, truth is violence. Neighboring empires didn't understand Altuvin. To them, power came from stone, steel, and submission. But Altuvin had none of these. No walls, no armies. Just people who acted like they had nothing to fear, and that terrified them. Spies were sent. Propaganda spread. They called Altuvin a cult, accused its leaders of sorcery, of weakness, of hiding behind polished stone. But they never found anything, because Altuvin hid nothing. That was its strength. You cannot destroy what is not defended. And so, the first war began. It was not fought with swords. It was fought with mirrors. When the soldiers of Ardash stormed the outer towns of Altuvin, they found their weapons stolen not by force, but by shame. Their violence reflected back at them. Citizens stood quietly in the streets, holding polished metal to their faces, and for many, that was enough. They dropped their swords and walked away. Not all, of course. Some fought. Some burned. Some killed. But the deeper they went, the quieter it became. No cries. No resistance. Just reflection. The enemy began to fracture not from defeat, but from inner collapse. One general wrote in his journal, "They broke us without touching us." I saw my face and could not remember why I held a blade. That general later disappeared into the mountains. Some say he became a monk. Others say he was taken in by the Mirror Kings, made to see his truth until he was no longer a threat. This is how Altuvin survived its first invasion, not by destroying the enemy, but by removing the enemy within the enemy. And for a time, it worked. Let's pause here for a moment. Let yourself feel the strange silence of Altuvin, a city without sound, yet full of meaning. Imagine walking its streets at night, lanterns glowing not outward, but inward, lighting only the faces of those who pass. No one shouts. No one runs. And yet, everything moves with purpose. Children are taught to speak only after listening. Elders whisper wisdom into water before drinking. Every house contains a mirror, and every mirror a reminder. What you see is what you allow. It is this radical vulnerability that gave Altuvin its power. But power, even quiet power, does not go unnoticed. Soon, other kingdoms conspired not just to destroy Altuvin, but to erase it completely, to break its mirrors, burn its halls, and write new stories in its place. and they nearly succeeded. But that, dear listener, is a tale for the second half of our night. So close your eyes. Let the stillness of Altovan wash over you. Let its silence shield your dreams. And remember, true kingdoms are not built with stone, they are built with self. And what you reflect, you become. They came at night, not because darkness gave them advantage, but because they feared the light. The allied forces of the south, a coalition of 6 kingdoms, moved silently through the valley passes. No banners, no drums, only cold breath and steel. But Altovan was not sleeping. Its people did not believe in surprise. Every household had seen the signs. The faltering of birds, the stillness of dogs, the sudden hush of rivers. They believed that the world whispered its warnings if only you listened. And so, they waited. No one ran. No one screamed. The young were taken to the reflection caves, massive underground hollows polished with obsidian, deep enough that the surface noise never reached them. There, they were taught how to breathe through fear, how to see without eyes, how to survive without resistance. The elders, meanwhile, did the unthinkable. They removed the mirrors. Across the capital, thousands of mirrors were quietly lifted from their mounts, carried by hand, and submerged in the cold mountain lakes. Each mirror was wrapped in silence. Each mirror was prayed over, and each mirror sank, vanishing from view, because Altovan believed in one final truth. If the world refuses to see itself, we must not help it lie. The invading armies entered the capital expecting confrontation. They found reflection, not in glass, not in steel, but in silence. People stood in streets, eyes open, lips sealed. Shops were untouched. Homes remained unlocked. The invaders searched, looted, burned, but no one stopped them. And that, perhaps, was the greatest resistance of all. The soldiers became desperate, hungry not for victory, but for reaction. They needed to be feared. They needed to be hated, because without that, what were they? A child among the attackers wept as his torch was lit, not because he saw horror, but because he saw his own hand holding it. That night, the great fire of Altovan was lit not by its enemies, but by its architects. The Mirror Kings knew the cost of clarity. They chose to erase themselves. And so, the Hall of Echoes was consumed. The Chamber of Breath fell to ash. The Spiral Archive, the last known map of human emotional frequency, was sealed in wax and dropped into the river's mouth. They did not run. They did not fight. They vanished. By morning, nothing remained. Only ash. And stillness. Today, no maps. Show all TUVEN. No ruins. No carvings. No graves. Historians debate whether it existed at all. But those who believe, those who've seen the lakes under a certain moonlight, say that sometimes, just sometimes, a face appears beneath the surface. Not their own, but someone watching, someone remembering. And if you whisper a question to the water, you may not hear an answer, but you will know if it was a worthy question. That was the gift of the Mirror Kings. Not power, not truth, but the courage to reflect. So tonight, ask yourself not what you've conquered, but what you've mirrored. What pain have you passed on? What stillness have you ignored? And when the noise of the world fades, who do you see? If you don't like the answer, maybe it's time to let it burn, like they did. And become something quieter, something clearer, something kinder. Sleep now. Let go of noise. You are more than your echo. You are a mirror, and mirrors don't lie. Only people do. They were never loud, not even in celebration, not in mourning, not in war. This was not shyness. It was not weakness. It was designed. The people of Illanmere believed that sound was sacred, that to speak without need was to bruise the world. Every word, to them, was a stone dropped into still water, sending ripples that could not be undone. And so, they mastered silence. Their cities had no bells. Their markets no shouting. Their children learned to cry in whispers. But this was not a sad place. It was the quietest joy you've ever felt. The kind that hums in your chest. The kind that doesn't demand to be seen, only shared. Their streets were paved with soft wood that muted footsteps. Their doors were built to open without a creak. Even their instruments were played with gloves, so that the echo belonged only to the wind. And in this silence, they created wonders. Ilinmir was not powerful in the way most empires are remembered. They did not conquer. They did not expand. But they observed. And through observation, they understood things no other civilization could. They learned that grief has a sound, even when not spoken, that longing changes the rhythm of a breath, that fear can be heard in the pause between footsteps. They developed entire libraries of feeling recorded not in books, but in gestures. A single hand movement could tell the story of a lifetime. A tilt of the head could say, "I forgive you." Their greatest art form was called still telling. Stories performed without words, without music, without motion. Only presence. To watch a still telling was to feel your own heartbeat slow. To forget your name, then remember your purpose. But silence, like all things, frightened those who did not understand it. When merchants from the east visited Ilinmir, they mistook the quiet for arrogance. When soldiers came, they heard no surrender and assumed defiance. When kings sent messengers, and no reply came, they believed it was insult. And so, they did what the loud often do. They invaded, but Ilinmir did not fight. They simply did not respond. The attackers marched through cities expecting resistance. There was none. No arrows. No walls. No screams. Only silence. The silence unnerved them. They struck statues, but the statues did not break. They shouted, but no one answered. They burned houses, but the wind refused to carry the smoke. And then, one night, the noise became unbearable not for the defenders, but for the invaders. They fled, not from swords, not from fire, but from the sound of their own voices echoing in a place that did not welcome noise. To this day, no one knows where Ilinmir truly was. Some say its buildings sank into the ground, pulled down by the weight of too much listening. Others believe the people walked quietly into the ocean, becoming fish who sing only once in their lives. But a few whisper this, that Ilinmir still exists, not as a city, not as a kingdom, but as a choice, because silence is always waiting, waiting, for you to notice it. To respect it. To use it well. So tonight, try this. Close your eyes. Don't speak. Just listen. To the air. To your breath. To what your heart is trying to say when you stop distracting it. And if you hear nothing, that's the invitation. That's the kingdom of silence welcoming you home. Sleep now. And may your dreams be quiet enough for truth to whisper through. The people of Ilinmir believed that silence was not the absence of sound, but the presence of everything else. Where others listened for voices, they listened for intention. Where others searched for volume, they searched for vibration. And where others feared emptiness, they found meaning. Their elders taught that every soul had a sound, too pure for the ear, that to truly hear another being, you had to quiet your own noise first. Only then could you enter what they called the deep hush, a moment where two spirits touched without a word. It happened rarely. In shared glances. In stillness after storms. In the quiet between a question and its answer. They said that love lived there. So did truth. So did the gods. The temples of Ilinmir had no statues. No images. No idols. Only space. Large open chambers where people sat in silence, not to ask for things, but to remember what they already had. They believed prayers did not rise, but expanded, that gratitude, if held silently, could ripple across mountains, that forgiveness whispered within could reach across oceans, that sorrow, when met with stillness, could become light. Their most sacred ritual was a silence shared at sunset. No fire. No food. No movement. Just hundreds of people sitting together, facing west, watching the sun fall without saying a word, not because they had nothing to say, but because the moment was already speaking. Then, one day, the wind changed. It became restless, not violent, just impatient. The trees whispered faster, the water pulsed louder. Even the stars, it seemed, began to blink with urgency. And Ilinmir understood. Their time had reached its soft end. They did not resist. They did not weep. They prepared the way, only they knew how. Each citizen spent one final week in total silence. Not even the gestures remained, just stillness. A quiet so deep it made the world lean in to listen. Then, one morning, the city was gone. Not burned. Not conquered. Just gone. Stone by stone, breath by breath, folded into the hush between seconds. The invaders returned again, but found nothing. No ruins. No bodies. Only a peculiar stillness that made their chests ache and their voices falter. And some of them, unable to explain the feeling, stayed. They sat where the people once sat. They listened. They began to understand. They say if you are very quiet, not just outside, but inside, you might still find Ilan. Not on a map. Not in a book, but in the pause before tears. In the space between heartbeats. In the moment before you say something you don't mean, but choose silence instead. There it is. The kingdom that spoke without speaking. And tonight, it speaks to you. Not with words, but with welcome. So be still, breathe slowly, and listen not for sound, but for what is underneath it. Because maybe, just maybe, you are not hearing this story. You are remembering it. Sleep now, child of the hush. Let your dreams carry you through the quiet, and may the silence of Ilan teach you what no voice ever could. Before there were calendars, before the moon had names, before anyone thought to measure anything, they were already remembering. They called themselves the Siratel, which means those who return, not because they wandered, but because they knew something most had forgotten. Time is not a line. It is a spiral. And memory is not about the past. It is the only way forward. The Siratel built no towers. They conquered no neighbors. They raised no flags. Instead, they planted stones, one by one, in circles, in patterns, across valleys, on hilltops, beneath rivers. Each stone contained a memory, not written. Not carved, but sung. Soft songs, poured into the stone with breath and touch and ritual. The kind of song you don't hear with ears. You feel it in your ribs, in your teeth, in the space behind your eyes. People laughed at them. Other empires built walls. The Siratel built silence. Other kings demanded tribute. The Siratel offered questions. Other nations rushed forward. The Siratel turned inward. And because of that, they saw things no one else did. They saw patterns repeat every few centuries. They watched storms return in the same rhythm. They marked the dreams of children and matched them to visions from 1,000 years before. To them, prophecy was not prediction. It was recognition. They trained memory keepers, not scribes, but singers of recurrence. Each child born was paired with an elder, not to be taught, but to remember together. Side by side, they sat beneath the remembering stones. Listening. Feeling. Crying. Sometimes without knowing why, because what they remembered was not just their own story, but yours. Mine. Ours. When other empires looked to the stars for guidance, the Siratel looked into the space between stars, the silence between beats, the dreams before language. They knew that what is truly eternal has no name, only presence, only rhythm, only return. And then came the forgetting, the fires that erased libraries. The rulers who feared old knowledge, the merchants who sold noise instead of truth. Slowly, the spiral was broken. The stones went quiet. The singers grew hoarse. The children began to dream in static. And one by one, the Siratel faded from the world. Not in war. Not in plague, but in amnesia. Yet not all was lost, because memory, real memory, cannot be killed. It waits, like mist above still water. Like warmth in cold hands, like a name you almost remember right before sleep. The stones still hum quietly. You've walked past them. On mountain trails. By old rivers. In fields where nothing grows. You felt the hum, maybe, but you didn't stop. That's okay. You weren't ready. But tonight, you are. So now, breathe slower. Listen not for sound, but for feeling. Let the weight of your chest sink gently. Let your thoughts slow, not disappear, just spiral inward. Because the Siratel did not vanish. They became memory. became. Rhythm became that part of your soul that knows more than your mind ever could. Tonight, as you drift into sleep, you do not forget. You remember. You return, not to a place, but to a truth, that you have been here before, that you will come again, and that between dreams and daylight, there is a song waiting for you. Can you hear it? There, under the noise, beneath the breath, between heartbeats, that is the Siratel, that is you. Sleep now. And when you wake, do not ask where the empire went. You are the empire. Now return.